Welcome to today's Charity Recruit virtual boardroom. As you know, I'm Emily from Charity Recruit, and I'm really pleased that you've joined us today for Check Your Blind Spots, the decrease in donation. We know donation behaviours are shifting, and charity retail teams are really feeling the impact of that. So today's session's about cutting through all that noise and understanding what's really driving that change, from new European legislation to the role of pre-loved textiles and all the opportunities that are emerging through AI. We're really pleased to be joined by Andy this afternoon. He brings a wealth of experience from Oxfam, British Heart Foundation, John Lewis, and most recently New Life. He's worked with more than 140 retail brands and has a brilliant way of turning complex changes into practical actions for charity leaders. So over to you, Andy. Let's get started.
Thank you. Thanks, Emily, and thanks, Christiana, and thanks to the Charity Recruit team as well for the opportunity to give you an overview. I'm not presenting from some swanky boardroom somewhere or even a home office. I'm actually in the Midlands, outside what is a really, really large regional office for one of the big supermarkets. And there's been a meeting there today, and as you might imagine, they're all getting really busy for some kind of shopping event on Friday. And to be honest, I'm not convinced, and I'm not a believer that they're really, really busy. So I would have been in there doing this presentation, but the room, as you can appreciate, was under a little bit of pressure from timing perspective. So thanks for the invite, and thanks for the opportunity. And I'm more than happy to take questions as we go through this presentation, which is me talking for the next 30-40 minutes or so. But of course, if you've got something that you want to wait until the end, we're completely flexible in terms of the style. My kind of working relationship at the moment is on a fractional point of view, which gives me a really good element of being quite forward about things. And when you've got an employer, you kind of be quite careful what you talk about, because you've got brand perspectives or cultural perspectives that all get thrown into that mix. So being fractional, I can be a little bit more upfront and probably sometimes a little bit more daring around some of the topics I can talk about. And certainly what's helped me in that fractional approach, certainly with some of the work within charity retail, is it's quite refreshing for someone to walk through your door and say, "Oh, hang on a minute, why are you doing it like that?" Because there's sometimes that fear, isn't there, when you do that internally of, "Oh, hang on a minute, are you a team player or not?" So again, hopefully this will be a little bit forward thinking and give some real good ideas and suggestions. The title about checking your blind spot really does look at the landscape of what's happening currently, not only within charity retail, because I'm aware that some of the listeners, and this has been recorded, so if you listen back to this, you may work in fundraising, you may work in volunteering, you may be directly involved in charity retail, or you might be a director of ops, so some of the roles will vary. But I think what's really starting to become quite interesting is how volunteers, how customers, supporters, donors are now interacting with charity brands. And if you look at the different demographics of generations of how they're interacting, what their social impact, their thoughts are about the charities that they support, some of it has become quite transactional. And I know from a marketing perspective, that'll be a night invested lots of money, lots of people hours in terms of what your messaging is and how that lands and where it lands and what impact it has. But ultimately, I think sometimes we've just got to face up to a fact that people are just shopping because they've liked something that you've got. It's on a platform that you're interacting in, or certainly it's in a shop environment that they've been and had a look and seen and quite like, and they've bought it. So I think in terms of what that demographic looks like now and their interactions is becoming equally, I'd say, fractional as well. What's really starting to change is you'll have seen the big news this year. Some of the organisations who are being quite upfront about what their retail estate looks like from a cost perspective, some of the complexities that they're finding from some of the increased costs, not just in people, but in terms of energy, in terms of leases, in terms of the technology now that they're being expected to deploy in some of those organizations as well. When you look at what that retail format can generate, some of them are still at break even. So it's questionable in terms of what that footprint looks like. There's no doubt Vinted has had a massive impact, and I do mean massive impact on the sector. But I feel the sector's been really squeezed. It feels as if we're in a vice. Feels as if someone's got the handle at both ends and we're being squashed in the middle. So you've got Vinted. So we've gone through a cost of living crisis. There are economic challenges, and certainly we'll find out in the budget this week what some of those further economical challenges will throw at us. But if you've got Vinted at one side of this vice handle of where traditionally supporters, customers, and donors are now finding it's actually quite easy to transact on Vinted. It's actually quite easy to turn something into available income rather than give it to your nominated charity. It does suggest that charities have maybe got to operate slightly differently in what their approach is and what their tag might be in terms of that catchment. And then you've got on the other side of the vice, you've got not only have you got all the economic impact that we've witnessed and that we're experiencing, but you've got legislation. And that legislation, whilst it is not active currently in the UK, many of the brands who I am involved with at the moment, some of the conversations that we have around excess stock, where that stock goes, what the supply chain is, what that downstream looks like versus upstream, that's really starting to become quite challenging as well. I'll give some examples. So over in Europe currently, there are a number of states who have independently of each other brought forward legislation of what should happen, what needs to happen, and what fines will take place if, as a clothing retailer, you don't meet certain thresholds. So, for instance, if you're operating in the Netherlands, which is where I was last week, there's certain legislation in place around take back. That's where a consumer brings clothing back into that retail physical establishment based on a number of new units that have been sold. So let's just expand on that a little bit. If you are a big brand retailer and you put 100,000 new t-shirts through your retail stores in the Netherlands at the moment, legislation states that you must take 50,000 back. Doesn't have to be your brand, doesn't have to be the same item. So it's not t-shirt for t-shirt. It's physical clothing items that you need to take back. And if you don't, well, then what happens is you're fined as a organization. So some of the organizations have actually incentivized themselves to, well, why don't you bring that item back and we will give you a coupon. So if you bring your old clothing back and you shop with us again in store, we will incentivize that behavior by giving you a coupon. Now, that already happens at the moment in the UK, and you'll know that Marks and Spencers have been doing that for years. It's now called Another Life. It's a concept that was running with Oxfam. I think it's been running for something like 10 or 15 years, so it's quite mature in its model. And that is removing from that donation space that where that clothing might traditionally go. Now, in the Netherlands, the number of high street charities is actually really small. So the impact is likely to be less than what it would be in the UK. And if you think about how many charity shops there are currently in the UK, and that will flex and it will change, if EPR, extended producer responsibility, in its same format of how it's been deployed across Europe is deployed in the UK, wow, that's going to have a massive impact on the level, the quality, and the number of donations that are made into charity. And you can see why, because it is now becoming a commodity item. That those retailing organizations will now want that product for their own reporting to show that they are active within that take back scheme. Next is post back. And you'll have seen, if you're active on social media, many organizations have kind of got to that point of, well, how do we interact with our consumer? How do we stay in touch with our consumer? We've got email, we've got social media, we've got big brand advertising. But if we look at what incentivizes a shopper to come through those physical retail estate doors, then some of us now are spending much more time on social interaction, social media. You've got social commerce. Why not throw in post back at the same time? So now you can bundle up your items, you can put them in a bag, you can go down to your local in-post locker or every convenience store, post office, hand a bag across the counter, scan a QR code on your mobile phone, and hey, presto, that's it. That's that donation on its way somewhere. So postback is becoming another pressure. So there's all these pressures which lead into kind of how we're interacting with our donors, how we're going to interact with our shoppers, and how we're going to sustain that business. Because for sure, one thing that will happen within that physical space of charity retail is that costs are going to increase. So we're going to have to find a way, some way, somehow, of increasing that revenue that we can transact. And on another really interesting thought process of how our European neighbours work versus what the traditional model looks like in the UK. When I was in the Netherlands last week, by chance, and I didn't plan this, but by chance, I went into a store, and it wasn't a charity shop, it's actually a commercial offering. This organization now have 9 stores across the Netherlands. Each store is the size of a regular shape size Aldi, so about 20,000 square feet. And within that store, the heading, all the advertising on the windows outside, it just looks like it would look like a typical fashion retailer, but price is the main driver to get you through that door, because the price point is 3.5 cents per gram. So now you're walking into a physical retail store and you're not buying an item with a swing tag on it that gives you a little bit more detail and gives you a price point. You're buying an item based on its weight. And from a psychological point of view, I think it's absolutely genius, because what you're doing in that store, as I did, I'm walking around, I can see a Ben Sherman shirt, I can see a pair of Levi 501s, I can see an Adidas pair of trainers, and I've got my basket, and I'm thinking, oh, I quite like that colour of that Ben Sherman shirt. Yeah, of course, I want a pair of Levi 501s, especially if I'm going to get them at a good deal. And there's some Adidas Samba trainers that I've not had for years, and now I can have, and these are in fantastic condition, and I want to buy them. And then you get to the weigh station, where you physically weigh the items that were in your basket, and then you get a digital readout of how much that costs. So you can work it out. It's 35 euros per kilo. But what's really interesting is that I'm already emotionally on that journey of, I want the 501s. I've picked out the Ben Sherman shirt. I've got the Adidas Samba trainers. I'm not putting them back because the weight came in more than that I thought it would be. I've actually gone on that journey and it's too late now. I'm committed to, I want those items and I'm paying the price. And you can see from 9 physical store formats that it's actually working. So it's really different. Imagine bringing that concept into the UK and floating that idea in one of your boardrooms or one of your think tanks or one of your senior leadership team meetings. I'll tell you what we're going to do, guys. We're going to sell stuff by the weight rather than by an individual price. It'd be chaos, but it does work. So sometimes those really interesting, innovative ideas have managed to make some commercial impact and some commercial sense. Now, quite interestingly, they don't have a web page. Is that because you can't weigh things online? Probably, but for them physically, it works pretty well. And the danger of that is that they're eyeing the UK as a possibility because they can see the saturation, they can see how the model currently works, and by bringing something new and fresh to that marketplace could be something quite interesting for them. So we've got all these challenges. Andy, you keep throwing challenges at us, but you're not giving us any answers. Well, one of the ways of tackling some of these challenges is to the location that I'm in today in Corby at this very large supermarket chain regional operational centre is to just start to look at things from a different perspective. And the charity that I've been representing today is a children's disability charity. And in that meeting that we've just had from the charity, we've had the fundraising team, we've had the volunteering team, we've had a retail team, and we've had a operational team. And you might think, well, there's a lot of people to having a meeting with a big national supermarket, but just hold that thought because the conversation today has been around, yes, of course we want your excess stock. Yes, we want your returns. We want your overstock. But here is the impact of working with this organisation. This is the social impact of what this actually means from a fundraising perspective. This is what it means from a volunteering perspective of how volunteers get engaged with this process and start to promote what the organisation can do. And from an operational capability, don't worry that we ourselves are a regional charity, because here's the operational head who will explain how the stores work, what the physical capabilities are, how much stock they can take, where that stock goes, what the ultimate destination is, either physically on store or transactional online. And then from the retail perspective, what those kind of price points look like, what we're seeing in terms of an interaction from current customers, shoppers, donors, and what you've got in terms of what the prospect is to open that to a much wider audience. Oh, and by the way, if you're asking us at the moment to take all the labels out of your clothing because it protects your brand and there's a fear that this might go viral online and suddenly this organisation starts to undercut your t-shirts or kids' pyjamas, don't worry, it's just a regional perspective. And wouldn't it look great from an organisational perspective if you, as a really big national supermarket, were indeed promoting the connection and cause to that children's disability charity? And it does have, this is obviously not the first time that this has happened, but it does have a real solid impact upon that organisation. We talk about volunteering days from a national perspective, and that's not just coming into the charity shop and unloading black bin bags and deciding if it's wearable or non-wearable, if it's £5 or if it's £10 or if it's £15. We invite people to come, and if you are working in an accounts and finance role, well, why don't you come in for the day and work with our accounts and finance teams? If you are retailing and merchandising, why don't you come in for a day and teach us all about retail and merchandising, how it might work on a bigger format, versus a smaller format? So are there some of the ideas that you are working with that we could equally be working with as well? So there's some of the ideas. There's another one as well, which is kind of fundamental in how this marketplace is shifting. And I'm going to come back to Vinted. For the longest time, my association with eBay was absolutely unbreakable. eBay, Charity Connect, different charity formats that eBay run, the inclusivity, how much, there's no charges for operating on the platform, the big national events that they run. I've spoken at some of their international events as well. And I've been fortunate enough to have a look at some of the US operations from a goodwill, and some of the charities that are in operation in some of the cities across in the States, to be able to then bring those ideas back to the UK. I won't get in trouble for saying this, but some of those ideas that we brought back from the States now are kind of incumbent in British Art Foundation, and British Art Foundation now being worldwide the largest charity online reseller of pre-loved items. You can see that some of those ideas did land quite well and have been quite successful. So I've been wedded to eBay for the longest time. And eBay is that really good format you can do fundraising through eBay. You may not be aware of that. You can ask sellers of their own items on eBay to donate a percentage to your organization, to your charity. Again, those are really good programs to get involved with. And of course, there's all the innovation around product identities and product values, and how some of the research, some of the market tools that you can use to really identify what that market cap might be on 1,000 children's pajamas that you've just been donated from a big brand supermarket, as an example. So it really gives you that level of information that you can use for your organization. Some charities within e-commerce are still, it's kind of black and white TV technology, if I don't mind being so upfront about this, because it's almost seen as we'll just put this online, or we'll just have Bob or Margaret comes in on a Wednesday afternoon and they do online, so we'll pass that to them online, and they can work all that out. It's moved on massively. And for the first time earlier this year, as an experiment, me and my family got involved with Vinted. Right. Let's grab the bull by the horns. Let's see if we can break it. Let's see if it really does work to the potential that everyone's talking about, how wonderful this new platform is. And I did some quick research before we walked into this supermarket retailer this morning, just to get a level of understanding of how many items of theirs are currently on sale on the Vinted platform. And it was just this morning. So this is not a week, it's not a month, it's just this morning. And I typed the brand in, and I had access to well over 123,000 of their items, all new with tags. So if you ever get into that conversation with a brand retailer where they say, no, we couldn't possibly sell any of our things online with your organization, I just tend to turn my laptop round to face them and say, sorry, they're already there. Do you want to embrace this and work with us? Or do you want this to just be a separate marketplace that you pretend doesn't exist? And that's always an interesting conversation. But getting involved with Vinted was a real eye-opener, because you may be a Vinted user and I may be preaching to the converted. But from our family perspective, to take a couple of photographs, for some of the descriptions to autofill, and then from the pricing point of view, it gives you an indication of what that item is selling for at the moment. And you get kind of a green banding. Yeah, your pricing is within what shoppers are prepared to pay. Or you get a red banding of, maybe a little bit expensive and you want to change your mind and you want to reduce your price. And again, it's in Vinted's best interest that you are being transactional on their site. They don't get paid if you list something and it doesn't sell. I guess in some respect, eBay are the same. They're in this game for things to sell, and therefore they're motivated to make sure that at a price point it meets that customer's desire. It is that price point that it's prepared to sell for in the marketplace. And we got into Vinted. I've got quite a young family, and they were looking around at some of their toys that they don't use anymore. And they too, with some adult supervision, of course, have started to get involved with Vinted. For my two youngsters, it's quite a good way of looking at some old toys that they've had that they don't use anymore, and they want some new toys, and therefore well, we've got to sell some to make some room for the new ones. And it's Christmas, and Christmas is around the corner. So it's a real good excuse as a parent to try and clear out some of that stuff that you don't use anymore. But I must say, from a user experience and the in-post stroke every locker system, shop system, wow, it works. And therefore, I can now bridge that link to understanding what that level of demographic who operate in that space, their interest in being able to pop into a locker system and pick up a parcel, or pop into a locker system and put a parcel in that locker system. And that could be a donation, it could be a return, it could be something that they've sold. You have to look at the locker system as a way of enablement of your interaction with that donor, sponsor, shopper. And if it can reach my demographic, then certainly in the generations which are slightly younger than I am, are very much prevalent in that system and how it works. And one of the locker systems, just out of interest, and you may have seen this on a social media post that I put together, there's one of the German supermarket discounters at the moment who have actually gone, they must have put their installation program into turbo, because the locker system that was down at one of the German discounters was longer than a double-decker bus. If you talk to InPost, and I do, because we are interested in using their mechanism from a donor perspective for receiving goods. If you talk to InPost, some of the biggest challenges that InPost have at this moment in time is the availability of locker spaces. And yeah, of course, you can check it on your app and you can see if there's a locker free. And generally on a busy afternoon outside Tesco, there are no available lockers. InPost admit that they're collecting from their locker system at the moment between 4, 5, 6 times a day. And even that isn't enough to keep up on demand. So it does have its own challenges. But again, that kind of lends itself to, wow, this is a really popular system. It's really cost effective and it works really well. So cost effective, let me just throw some numbers at you in terms of what that looks like. It's about £2.30. And if you get into to send a parcel through the locker system, and there are various sizes, so you'll know there's large and medium and small. But again, that can play quite effective to what your donation program might look like, and specifically what your donations might ask for. So generally, iPads, tablets, mobile phones, small tech that still has a value can fit quite easily in some of those small locker systems. And it's not beyond the realms of possibility to actually run that kind of mechanism, run that kind of event on a test and a trial to see what that generates. My time at Oxfam through the postal donation service, as well as physical take back, was phenomenal. The volume that generated, and of course it's a national charity and it will have various levers and mechanisms at its disposal to promote that, but certainly the engagement that it received through, shall I walk through town with all my donations on the hope that the charity shop of my choice that day is receiving donations and will accept them, or do I put it in a bag and put it in a locker system and thank you very much, QR code, wave goodbye to it? You can see the levels of friction and the ease of use that lended itself to why that became so popular. And I am talking about actual tonnage of product that was posted on a weekly basis. So just to kind of put some context to this now, and technology and some of the thought processes that go along with this. I've talked about on social media for quite some time around the barriers to technology. You might come back and say, Andy, we're just a regional charity. We don't have deep pockets. We don't have tech delivery, IT that can get involved with this. And if you have, they're already engaged on projects, so they've got no bandwidth to look at something new. That's always the case, whether you're regional or national. But some of this tech is actually quite easy. Some of this tech is really, really easy to use. And some of this tech you're probably using already. So through Microsoft and their not-for-profit program, a lot of technology is available for no or little cost. So don't let that cost barrier get in between you and some of those thought processes and those ideas of how you might innovate fundraising or volunteering or physical retail, or at least online retail, because the barrier to entry is actually extremely low. And AI, wow, AI is in the press at the moment almost constantly. AI is this thing that's going to put us all out of work. Suddenly we're going to be, it is. Suddenly, I can see people laughing on the call. Suddenly, robots and, the Tesco delivery that gets delivered at the moment will be via robot, or there'll be a drone landing in my back garden. I don't think we're there yet, but how AI can really, really assist is going back to that vintage green light, red light. And you've got to think about that because of the donations that now come across that physical retail estate. You have to be able to determine very quickly, am I keeping it and selling it in the shop? Am I selling it online? Does it have a value? Doesn't it have a value? And those decisions, the quicker that you can make those decisions, the faster you can put product through your system, your throughput increases, your efficiencies increase, and you take away from that decision process that personal opinion, that person's thought process of I think it's this worth this much versus what you can see trending in the marketplace. I'll just round off with some new goods, because how a lot of organizations at the moment are starting to engage with their kind of communities, their donors, their followers and supporters is through new goods. And certainly as an organization, if you've got that capability to be able to offer new goods, either donated or some bought in new goods, it's really now starting to it can really add weight to your cause, to your program as to what you deliver. So you might expect, a children's charity are heavily involved in toys. An animal charity might be very heavily involved with different elements of product sets, etc. But again, it does lend itself quite very useful to what that retail offering looks like. So we've talked about some of the challenges from legislation. We've talked about some of the behavioural challenges of what's happening in the marketplace at the moment. I do think that there is a potential for charities to really get involved with extended producer responsibility and digital product passport. Because if you think of that brand retailer for one moment, they need data. You're going to have to somehow capture that data. If you can, you suddenly start to become an intrinsic value to their organization. They need that data as to what is being transacted through the charity, what the levels of interest are, what's been recycled, what's been resold, what's been reworn, what's been repaired. And it can be quite easy. So RFID is very good and very simple to use just off a mobile phone, even simply QR codes. One of the things that I would give as a level of advice that even some of the nationals really do feel quite challenged around is how this is evolving and what route do they take and what is their responsibility in all of this. And I've been quite upfront with some really, really big brand retailers, and I've turned that conversation in their direction. No, 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 no. It's your responsibility to put the RFID tag in the piece of clothing. It's your responsibility to put the QR code in that piece of clothing that shows what the digital product passport is, that shows the consumer of what they need to do with this item once it's finished its end of life, or where to donate, or where to recycle. What we will do is we will deploy the technology that reads that information, and we will provide that technology or that data back to you as a partnership of how we work with each other as part of your donation mechanism of the products that you donate to us. That is how the relationship should work. So if you start to feel pressured by retailers, brands, or donors of you need to give us more data, you need to work harder, you need to tell us what we've done with our product, sometimes it's quite good to kind of turn that table around and point it back in the opposite direction. What we're facing here in the UK is a bit of a is quite unique. The States, the US work quite differently. Charity shops in Europe are not so much prevalent, with the exception of Humana, who've got about 1,000 shops across Europe. But I would say that Australia is not too far away from where the UK is in terms of how it operates through volunteers, how it operates through its fundraising mechanism, and how it operates through retail as well. So if you're switching your social media to any following and looking for any clues or snippets or information, then I'd be pointing you towards that Australian model of Vinnie's, Salvos, Red Cross, and there's one or two others. They're quite easy to find on social media. And of course, if you've got any further questions, you've only got to put my name in LinkedIn on social media. You can ask me a question or certainly come back through the Charity Recruit team and I'm sure they'll find me. But if you've got anything now that needs answering, please fire away. Back to you, Emily.
Wow, Andy, there's so much information there. I don't know how you've just talked like that for so long. Well done.
Thank you.
And there's so much information in there. Does anybody have any questions? I know we've dropped a few off as the conversation's gone on with timelines and one thing and another. But if anybody's got a question for Andy, now's your chance to ask. And if not, as Andy said, feel free to reach out to Andy via LinkedIn, or you can come back to us through our email. But thank you so much for joining us today. There's been a wealth of knowledge there, and hopefully you've taken some points away that you can utilize within your organizations. But yeah, keep your eye out on our website for our future events, and just leaves me to say thank you so much, Andy. You've been brilliant.